Fanta. Fanta was actually created during World War II by Coca-Cola's German branch. Because of wartime restrictions, they couldn't get the syrup needed to make regular Coca-Cola. So, the head of the German division, Max Keith, came up with a new drink using whatever local ingredients they had, and that's how Fanta was born in 1940. The name Fanta comes from the German word fantasy, meaning fantasy, since it was kind of a creative solution to a problem. Even though Coca-Cola's operations in Nazi Germany were limited by the war, the German subsidiary still worked under the regime's policies. Fanta was made for the local market and became pretty popular in Germany, but it wasn't directly involved in military production like other companies. After the war, Coca-Cola took back control of its German operations, and Fanta stuck around as a brand. While Fanta's creation is tied to the tough wartime conditions in Germany, Coca-Cola distanced itself from the Nazis and expanded the Fanta brand worldwide. Adidas. Adidas started with the Dassler brothers, Adolf and Rudolf, who set up the Dassler brothers shoe factory in Germany in the 1920s. During the Nazi era, like a lot of German companies, they got tangled up with the regime. Both of the brothers were members of the Nazi Party, and their factory made shoes for the German military during World War II. As the war went on, the Dassler factory used forced labor to keep things running. They had workers from occupied countries who were forced to work in tough, often brutal conditions, pretty standard for German companies that were supporting the war effort. But things between the brothers fell apart during the war, and after it ended, they split the company in 1948. Adolf went on to create Adidas, while Rudolf started what would eventually become Puma. Both companies had ties to that Nazi-era history, but later grew into major global sportswear brands. After the war, both Adidas and Puma worked on rebuilding their companies and expanding worldwide. Nestlé. Nestlé, the big food and drink company from Switzerland, was already a global player by the time World War II started. Even though Switzerland stayed officially neutral, Nestlé still had factories and operations in Nazi Germany and other parts of Europe under German control, and the business kept running during the war. During that time, Nestlé's German branches adjusted to the wartime economy. They produced food products that were used for both civilians and, in some cases, the German military. Nestlé wasn't a weapons maker or anything like that, but like a lot of international companies with offices in Germany, they kept operating under the rules and business opportunities of the Nazi-controlled system. There's also evidence that some of Nestlé's subsidiaries, including Maggi, used forced labor during the war. Many of these workers came from countries occupied by the Nazis. Back at headquarters in Switzerland, Nestlé's leadership tried to keep business going with both sides of the war, Allies and Axis, which helped the company survive the conflict, but raised some eyebrows later on. After the war, Nestlé grew fast and bought up a bunch of other food brands, becoming the global giant we know today. Daimler-Benz. Daimler-Benz, the company behind Mercedes-Benz, was a big player in Germany during the Nazi era. Like a lot of major companies at the time, it helped out the Nazi war effort by building military vehicles, aircraft engines, and other gear for the German army. During World War II, the company used forced labor in its factories, including prisoners of war and people from concentration camps, with many businesses working closely with the Nazi regime to keep up with wartime demands. These workers were treated terribly and forced to work in really harsh conditions. The company's leadership supported the Nazi government mainly to stay in business and keep those big military contracts coming. After the war, Daimler-Benz was investigated, and some of its top execs were held responsible. But the company itself survived and eventually became one of Germany's most successful brands. Years later, Daimler-Benz admitted its role during the Nazi era and joined in compensation programs for surviving forced laborers. Hugo Boss. Hugo Boss is a German fashion brand that got its start in 1924, founded by a guy named Hugo Ferdinand Boss. During the Nazi era, the company made a name for itself by producing uniforms for groups like the SS, SA, and Hitler Youth. Like a lot of businesses in Germany at the time, they sided with the Nazi regime to get government contracts and keep the company afloat. Hugo Boss himself joined the Nazi Party in 1931, even before Hitler took power. Business boomed under the Nazis, mostly thanks to the high demand for military-style uniforms. But during World War II, the company also used forced labor, prisoners of war, and other people who were made to work in the factories. After the war, Hugo Boss was fined and lost some of his rights for a while because of his early Nazi support. Eventually, the company shifted gears to making civilian clothes and went on to become the international fashion label we know today. In the 1990s and 2000s, the company publicly admitted its involvement during the Nazi era, apologized, and contributed to a fund for forced laborers, along with other German companies trying to take responsibility for what they did. Volkswagen. Volkswagen, which started in 1937, was created as part of a Nazi plan. The company was set up by the German Labor Front, a Nazi group, with Hitler and engineer Ferdinand Porsche leading the charge. The idea was to create the people's car, Volkswagen, a car that average Germans could afford. During World War II, Volkswagen stopped making regular cars and switched to producing military vehicles, like the Kübelwagen and Schwimmwagen, which the German army used a lot. Like many other companies at the time, Volkswagen used forced labor, including prisoners of war and people from concentration camps. The conditions were brutal, and many workers suffered or died. The company was closely tied to the Nazi government and benefited from wartime contracts and policies. After the war, Volkswagen was taken over by the British, rebuilt, and eventually became one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world. BMW. BMW is a well-known German car company, but during the Nazi era, it played a big role in supporting the war effort. Back then, BMW mostly made aircraft engines, and during World War II, they focused on building engines and parts for the Luftwaffe, along with motorcycles and other military gear. To keep up with production, BMW used forced labor, people who had no choice but to work in their factories. This included prisoners of war, foreign workers, and even inmates from concentration camps. The conditions were terrible, and like a lot of other German companies at the time, BMW worked closely with the Nazis to keep business going with government support and cheap labor. After the war, BMW was in bad shape, its factories were damaged, and the company had to start over. Years later, BMW came forward about its past, publicly acknowledged what happened. Porsche. Porsche, founded by Ferdinand Porsche in 1931, played a big role in the automotive world during the Nazi era. One of its early projects was designing the Volkswagen Beetle, which became the people's car after Hitler pushed for it to be affordable for regular Germans. It ended up being a key symbol of German industry after the war. During World War II, Porsche switched from making regular cars to military gear, producing tanks and other military vehicles for the Nazis. Ferdinand Porsche was pretty close to the Nazi regime, and his company profited from government contracts during the war. After the war, Porsche came under some scrutiny, but the company kept running and eventually became a major luxury car brand. In the years after the war, the Porsche family and the company started acknowledging their role in the Nazi era, including the use of forced labor.